Nice to see you all back, ladies and gentlemen. A couple of days ago, Bryce, one of the organisers, said to me, John, you have to understand the final session is how do we progress Australia's EV future from here? And why is this inevitable? The environment, the CO2, the pollution, the finite fossil fuels, the resources, as well as the benefits of electric versus combustion. Based on what's been spoken throughout the day, we are very lucky, ladies and gentlemen, to have a panel proudly sponsored and paid for by the Victorian State Government, Jet Charge, EV, FIMA for their solar inverters and e-mobility systems, and our friends at Mutual Transport with their Green Road initiatives. What a great idea. We have a stack of good people here, ladies and gentlemen. Professor Tim Flannery, you saw him this morning. He's been out sourcing more mammals. We have Beyhad Jafari, ladies and gentlemen, the CEO of the Electric Vehicle Council. We have Kathryn Trounson. Kathryn, I've only just heard of you today, but everybody speaks very, very highly from you. You are indeed our compatriot in the East Island, the CEO of the Electric Vehicle Council. No, you're not. You're the Better New Zealand Trust New Zealand. I'm told it's a particularly testy thing to get it right too, which is great. We are expecting another person to dial in, and indeed, there he is. Robert Llewellyn is from England. He's the founder of Fully Charged. The room's full, everyone's pumped. And the final guest, ladies and gentlemen, you know him well. He's the specialist reporter, potentially one of the last in Australia that's a real one. He's the green business climate policy. He's the carbon market specialist. He's the clean energy and clean tech development. He's the founding editor of Renew an Economy. He runs The Driven, and he's one step off the grid specialising. I'm going to hand it over to him to run this invigorating session. See the question button down the bottom, ladies and gentlemen, and hold on to your hats. We've got some exciting things happening. Take it away, Giles.
Thank you very much, John. That's quite an introduction, and I'm not too sure. I think I might just sort of go and retire now and just hang up my boots. But look, thank you very much, and look, thank you very much for asking me to host this final panel session, and congratulations to the AVEA on its excellent online webinar. I mean, quite a feat to put all these sessions together, and look, great response and some fantastic speakers. So today, welcome to the other panel members. Fantastic that you're all here. We've been asked to sort of talk about what's the future for EVs in Australia, what do we need to do, why do we need to do it? And we've got some great international guests, Kathryn from New Zealand and also Robert from the UK. And hi, Robert, it's been a while since I saw you. And we look forward to sort of your input of what's happening over there and maybe what we should be doing here. But look, I thought I'd just start with Tim. Tim, you gave the keynote address this morning. It was all about the climate imperative of why we, of course, need to cap emissions, arrest global warming at 1.5, I hope, but at very most 2. Just recap the importance of this and how transport and electric vehicles fit into this equation.
Giles, and could I just say, don't retire yet. You put a smile on my face every morning. When you're dealing with the climate science, that's really important because the news never gets better with the science, but it gets better with all of your green economy stuff, which is fantastic. Well, look, essentially, we are now in a position that most scientists would characterise as a climate emergency. The chance to stabilise the climate at 1.5 degrees above the pre-industrial average is slipping away by the month. We're very, very close to that not being achievable. We can still achieve 2 degrees. We might even be able to achieve 1.7 or 1.8. But we need to start acting right now. And this is why this is characterised as an emergency. Now, the science is really, really clear. We're close to the tipping points of the Earth's climate system. And if we cross those tipping points and trigger them, then the Earth system enters a positive feedback loop where it just keeps warming itself. That could happen through melting of the permafrost, destruction of the polar ice caps, a decay of the West Antarctic ice sheets, or the destruction of the Amazon rainforest through a rainfall deficiency that we're seeing the beginning of right now. So to increase our chances to avoid that, we really need to start taking action now, and every year is vitally important. You know, the best science is telling us that we need to reduce our emissions year on year by 8% between now and 2030 to have the best chance of staying within a reasonable range and not triggering those climate those positive feedbacks. It's the sort of stuff that keeps me awake at night, all the time as I watch governments dither and I see people not understanding how incredibly urgent this is. This is, in COVID terms, if you think back on earlier in the year, this is about like March 14 in Australia, when we had, the number of cases doubling every 4 days. The government had to act emphatically and quickly to contain that, otherwise things would run out of control. Well, that's where we are with climate now. So, the efforts of the EV group, of everyone, is just hugely important now. And everything we do this year and next year will be so much more important than the stuff we do in 2030, to be honest with you, because the chances will slip away if we don't act soon.
We've made a lot of gains in the electricity grid because we've got wind and solar into the grid. What sort of gains do you think we can make in the transport sector?
Well, the great thing about the transport sector is, at least, for buses, it's a no-brainer. Electric buses is very clear, the pathway through. I think we could start deploying them at scale now. They're widely used in China. They're available. Do it. In terms of EVs, I guess the average vehicle age in Australia, you'd know better than me, Giles, but I'd guess it's 13 odd years.
It's about a bit less, I think, but 11 or 12, yeah.
Yeah, so we could start replacing those right now with some very progressive policies, and particularly in the fleet area. If we could just have electric vehicles compete in terms of fleet purchases with things like the fringe benefit tax that, the fossil fuel vehicles get, but are harder to apply to electric vehicles. And just even, the luxury car tax that's applied to so many electric vehicles. If we could do something in that area and create some more incentives, I think we could move really quickly. You've just got to look at Norway, and I'm sure you heard from Norway today that they are well ahead of the game, and that's through good government policy. So we could be doing that. We could be doing our 8% a year, and we could avoid the worst of this catastrophe. But I fear it won't happen unless we all understand just how important it is that we act now.
I'm going to throw to Beyhad. Before I do that, I'd just like to invite all the listeners to throw in some questions if you've got some, and put them in the chat box or whatever you have. We'd love to get some audience feedback. But Beyhad, it seems like the EV industry has got a bit of a kick in the guts in the last 2 weeks with these EV taxes announced in South Australia and in some detail in Victoria. Bizarre detail, I might say. I just don't understand it at all. Look, what do we need to have in the policy area? I guess maybe just quickly address the EV tax and its likely impacts and what we can try and do to stop it. But what else do we need as a matter of urgency?
Look, I think in terms of what else we need, that's an area where I get to be not particularly smart and have all the answers, because as a market that's quite some way, a good 9 to 11 years behind the rest of the world on electrification of transport. We know what works. And these are pretty basic economic principles: make electric vehicles cheaper, more people purchase them. But not only do more people purchase them, as we'll hear about in the UK in a moment, more companies come and invest in your market and provide cheaper products. So if you look at the UK today, they have some 30 electric vehicles available, priced under the equivalent of about $60,000. We have about 5 available inside of that range. So it's, it creates that virtuous cycle. You get more investment, more people want to purchase it. Really importantly, in kickstarting that momentum, you start to get much like what we saw with rooftop solar panels, you start to get a real tangible clean energy product that provides a positive benefit to people's lives and has a massive role in shifting the Overton window around the crazy climate wars that we have in Australia. It's no longer about high-minded hypothetical discussions about economic transitions and workplace shifts. It becomes about things like, well, I generate my own power and I save on power bills. That's wonderful. I always like to say one of the most fun things, I'm not much of a car guy, so driving is just fine. But one of the most fun things for me is looking into my backyard and seeing my car charging. I think, isn't this a wonderful thing? There I am saving money right now. This is excellent stuff.
No, it's great.
Those type of things are quite important. And then that very naturally leads to the type of shift where, it would prevent us from the type of situation that we're in today in Australia, where not only do we not have incentives in place to encourage the uptake of electric vehicles, like most other comparable nations have, we now have subnational governments, state governments talking about taxing electric vehicles. Again, though, I would say the positive inside of that is that's not coming from a place of people not believing in the future of electric vehicles or hating electric vehicles. That's coming from state governments believing this is absolutely the future of our transport system. They're then just making the wrong responses out of it, of saying rather than put our shoulders behind this and help the green shoots grow and help grow businesses and jobs out of it, how do we protect our tax revenue base starting today, regardless of, or as we've seen more recently, not even having bothered to do the modelling on what impact it would have on uptake to be the world's only country to tax electric vehicle uptake.
Just Tim mentioned this morning about the need for tax reform. Does the EV Council think that should be the focus, or are you more interested in targets or maybe sort of incentives to encourage fleets with that particular targets, or is it going to be a mixture of all three?
Look, tax reform is certainly an important conversation. I think inside of what's happening around the country today, it's really important to note that we, and I know Ava and others, no one's against the idea of road funding reform. It's just that's not what's happening right now in states. It's a lazy and premature tax on electric vehicles that's being proposed. The way to do road funding reform has been proposed by transport experts for over a decade now. It's just been squibbed because it's seen as being too hard to do. But certainly, look, I think it's the first question that you asked as well, but those measures are really simple. They're carrot and stick measures of putting things like targets and fuel efficiency standards in place to require the decarbonisation of your transport sector, and coupling those with incentives to encourage consumers to reduce emissions by going to zero emissions rather than buying slightly more fuel efficient vehicles.
Kathryn, good evening over there in New Zealand.
Good
Perhaps you
evening.
can tell us a little bit what you've been doing in New Zealand. I mean, you've got some interesting schemes over there. I think there's the fee-based scheme there. You've certainly got more EVs on the road than we do have in Australia. You've got a very strong second-hand import market. Can you give us a quick overview about what you're doing and why?
Sure. Yes, we do have 23,000 EVs in New Zealand, which is exactly the same number as you have in Australia. Chris and I were only discussing that figure last week. We've been very lucky insofar as that the general population is used to buying imported Japanese cars, which is where the vast majority of our Nissan Leafs have come from. So we have probably half that number would be Nissan Leafs, the majority imported from Japan, some from the UK. I think the fee-based system is still under discussion. That came out in 2019 as part of a clean car discount, clean car standards, which the government was trying to push through last year, but one of the coalition members was against it because there were no, electrified pickups for the farming community, and they felt very strongly about that. Now that the Labour government and Jacinda are in power alone, then hopefully that means that they will revisit those standards. We are one of the few countries, obviously like Australia, that have absolutely no emission standards whatsoever, which is just bonkers. We should be trying to follow the UK and Norway and Europe by moving people with, as Beyhad said, that the carrot and the stick. If you want to drive a gas guzzling, horrible, nasty diesel, yuck, then you're going to pay for it big time. And the rest of us who drive EVs will benefit. But it also means that people who keep saying they can't afford more than 12,000 New Zealand dollars for an EV could actually get a little bit of a carrot to help them through. Because even today, I was reading something on one of our Facebook posts. And everybody will tell you that the only thing they regret about buying an EV is that they didn't buy it 2 years earlier. And that's just, it just came rolling through on one particular thread. And I thought that, that just absolutely sort of quantifies how amazing driving an EV is. And we need to do everything we can. Unfortunately, at the moment, we just have no RUCs on light passenger vehicles until we get to a 64,000 units in the country. So, even that, the idea that an RUC might come on in 2 or 3 years' time could quite happily put some people off, go, oh, it's not going to be as good. It's not going to be as good. And of course, our petrol is more expensive than yours. We pay $2 a litre. You probably pay $1.10, I think Chris was telling me. So, we can save an awful lot of money by driving an EV.
Your Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, drives an EV. I think she's got an Ioniq, and I understand
she does have an Ioniq. And in fact, the government has just ordered some e-trons. So they had to make sure that a car seat for a child would fit into the back of an e-tron, which evidently it will. So she, her crown car will become an e-tron very, very shortly. And I don't know whether you heard what I was saying earlier, but Steve West and ChargeNet, in fact, I'm going down tomorrow where they're opening their 300 kilowatt super ultra fast charger just south of Auckland tomorrow. So those will charge an e-tron at 150 kilowatts. So, you know, Jacinda could just round through, 20 minutes into the burger joint, quick burger, back out in the car. Perfect.
Rob, good morning to you.
Morning. Good morning.
Good morning. Great to have you on board. Look, listening to the tales from Australia and New Zealand, it must feel like you're either in another planet or you sort of time travel back in time, because in the UK, you have the government there has just announced a 2030 cutoff point for new petrol and diesel sales. That's from a Tory government. Did you guys take Boris out and give him a ride in an EV?
No, I have had to. It's been a very difficult week, strangely, because I've been on the radio a great deal in the UK, supporting a government that in every other aspect of everything they've ever done, said, thought of, where they went to school, every single atom of their being drives me critically insane. But I have to say, this is an extraordinary state of affairs, and it has actually I've had to say, to be fair to Prime Minister Johnson, which is the hardest thing to do, but it is been in his political life. It's not a sudden change. So when he was the mayor of London, he was trying to introduce hydrogen buses and battery electric taxis and all those things. He had bicycle hire. He didn't start it. It was already running, but they called it Boris Bikes, which again was one of the most annoying things. That all aside, it is a remarkable position to be in, because in every other aspect, a very good example being the current pandemic, we have been uniquely rubbish, and our government has been uniquely inept and terrible, and the human cost has been shocking. The levels that we have we have the highest death rate in Europe. We have the most infections. It's still ravaging the country now. The country's, barely functioning. So they haven't dealt with that well. Whereas Australia has done, it's so difficult coming from an Anglo-Australian family, talking to our relatives in Australia, who are going out to a restaurant. I've driven past closed restaurants. I know what they look like. There's no way we can go. But all that aside, it is a remarkable step. It is noticeable. And when I look at the figures, there's been over 68,000 new pure electric car sales this year in the UK. We're over 300,000 now pure electrics on the road. We're about 500,000 vehicles with plugs. But I think one of the key things, and I think this is what the hope there is for Australia, is the big companies, the Amazons, the big delivery companies, the post office, the mail service, all those people will be reading reports from now on of huge uptake of electric delivery vehicles, not one or two at the end that have a green parking bay with leaves painted on the side, just everything. So Amazon in this country will be 100% electric last mile deliveries in the next couple of years. And you now see all the time, you'll see a Amazon van going down the road and it's electric. It's a really common sight. And there are, in America, the same thing. And what you're seeing is their initial financial reports. And that's what's going to drive it, because you'll see a delivery company go, oh, we can deliver with these 50 vans and it costs us, I don't know, $100,000 a month or whatever in fuel. Or if we use 100 electric ones, it costs us $20,000. Oh, so we save $80,000 a month. Maybe we'll get the electric ones. That will drive it. And what that does is it starts to install a charging infrastructure and a consciousness in the general public. Oh, those people whose job it is to drive are using electric vehicles. So maybe it isn't quite as clinically insane as I get a lot of abuse from Australians if I ever say anything about electric cars in Australia, because there's always someone, and it's the same in this country, how people manage to do it in this country. What happens when I need to drive to Scotland? And I go, well, I don't know where you are. You might be in Scotland. So it might only take 10 minutes. But it's always that. And in Australia, it's always, I drive 11,000 miles in my ute non-stop every day. That's my commute. And you go, I kind of doubt that. And so my big argument, I think the things you need to push in Australia are bladder range, which I think is, although it's a joke, it's actually genuine. You cannot sit still for 6 or 7 hours You wouldn't do it in your home. You wouldn't do it anywhere else. You wouldn't do it on the beach. You wouldn't do it at the bar. You would, without getting up and moving or without going to the facilities. Yeah. And that is the range. My bladder range is, I've just done a test a couple of weeks ago, 167 miles. Boom. For a man my age, that's a result. In the UK, our average speed in the UK is about 50 miles. So that's about 3.5 hours.
I can just see the wonderful potential here for advice on buying electric vehicle cars. So what's the range of the cars? What's your bladder? We can find out.
We can be polite about it. We can say, what's your BR? have you had your BR test? Because a young person, it's going to could be 250 miles. I mean, you could do it. It's not good for you, though. That's the thing. Even if you're young, it's not good to strain it. And all the electric cars I drive go way over my bladder range. It's not even an issue. I always have to stop before the car does.
Oh, that's good. Last time I talked to you, you were just about to go to Norway to test drive. I can't quite remember what now. Norway
a Model 3. Yeah, it was when
Model
the Model 3
there
came
you go.
in. Yeah.
Norway is now at 70% percentage of sales of electric vehicles. Just extraordinary. What's it like being in a country with that many EVs around the place?
It is. I mean, I think the first thing I noticed was one of the first sort of multi-story, really big urban central Oslo car park. Which is everything's expensive in Norway, except electric cars. Everything else. If you want to eat, if you want to drive an electric car, cheap as chips. If you want to eat, or heaven forfend, drink alcohol, it's eye-watering. But you drive into that car park and you kind of go. And I was in a Model 3, and I sort of looked like my natural instinct is in the UK to look for where there might be a charger. Every single bay in that car park, and I think it was 680 spaces. Had a 7 kilowatt outlet, a simple thing. And you didn't have to do any negotiating for the electricity. You just plugged your car in and it started charging. There was no tap to pay or anything, but you paid for the parking, and that was not cheap. but it's just normal. It is normal everywhere you go. Now, I mean, I'm very intrigued to see, we haven't seen the report yet there. I don't know how many there are, but a good number, like 25 or 30 I-Pace, Jaguar I-Pace taxis running in Oslo that don't ever plug in. That's their whole point. They use induction charging on the streets, especially in where they wait at the airport, where they wait outside hotels, where they wait at the railway station. There are strips of road that have had induction charge plates put in, and they're charging as they wait, which is it's an experiment. And I'm not 100% convinced it's going to work, and it's not economic yet. No one else is going to do this, but it's good that the Norwegians are giving it a go.
It might be the future. Chris, you're the president of the AEVA. Listen to stories like that, it must sound like nirvana. What do you think that we need to have done? What would you most like to see in Australia to be able to get us there? And apologies for the lawnmower. He's just arrived. He's doing my acre, and he does not yet have an electric mower, I'm embarrassed to say, but there you go.
I can't hear it.
Have a word to him.
So look, it's a really interesting one, because you hear, obviously, Kathryn and Robert speak about what's going on. And I think Beyhad mentioned earlier, if we had incentives similar to what they were doing in Europe, so let's say $10,000 to $15,000 incentives, that automatically brings all of the cars that are available here into a completely different price bracket. And especially at the lower end, obviously the MG came out last week, would take a 44 down to a 34 and bring the Hyundais and the Nissans back into the 40s and potentially in the low 40s. I think we then immediately see this take up. For whatever reason, I think from what Tim was saying, our dealing of the pandemic and casting that against Robert's dealing of the pandemic in the UK. So we've done really well with the pandemic, but apparently our answer to EVs is we put a tax on them. So yet in the UK, they don't know how to deal with the pandemic, yet they can get their EV stuff sorted out, with I don't disagree with Robert's political thoughts about Boris. I lived in London for 6 years, so when he was mayor for a good time of it, so I understand the whole ruffled hair and looking like you're not really sure what's going on. I think that's all part of his act. But yeah, I mean, from our perspective, it's really clear. But we need to get very much on the incentive side, and we really need some federal direction. We need the federal government to buy into the whole idea. In New Zealand, you've got the Prime Minister currently driving an EV. and changing the government fleet to EVs. In Australia, last year, we have an election campaign where the now Prime Minister is telling people that EVs will ruin your long weekend, which is just absolute rubbish. We've just got to bust through these myths and actually just get on with it. And there's no reason, our probably culturally, our two nearest neighbours are New Zealand and the UK. They're doing it comfortably. There's no reason why we shouldn't be doing it comfortably as well. And actually, there should be even a pride point involved, because whether we talk about it from a sporting point of view or just from equality point of view, that's the kind of thing that we are as Australians built to do, and we need to be in that space.
The only minister that seems to drive an EV in Australia is Matt Kean, the energy minister in New South Wales. And it's no coincidence that he's also one of the most progressive ministers and has just unveiled this fantastic renewable energy transition plan, much to the horror of his teammates in the Conservative Party. So, have you thought maybe that's the key to sort of break through, is to put everyone in an electric vehicle and they can kind of see the benefits?
Yeah, we're actually looking for some ambassadors at the moment, and I had a conversation during the week with someone who's going to connect me with Zali Steggall as a starting point, because obviously she's been very pro the movement, but also we do need to lift the profile and normalise, which is amazing to me, because we all drive electric vehicles. Everybody here understands the EV smile. It just makes absolute common sense. You get in one of these things, and it's like the first time you've driven by yourself, at the Dodgem cars at a local show or something. As a 10-year-old, when your parents have let you go by yourself and you're steering it around all over the place, and you get out and you've got the biggest grin of all time. That's effectively your first experience in an EV, and I just don't understand why that hasn't become mainstream, and we're still getting such resistance. The apathy in this country has certainly been very disappointing. So yes, ambassadors is a definite way forward. And us as a group, all the people here today, we've got to keep working and working and working. We've got to work on the political side. We've also got to work heavily, I think, on the publicity side.
Tim, I'm just wondering if I can come back to you. You presumably try and talk to the politicians and sort of influence them and urge them to sort of move down the road. Are you finding that are there any signs that the blinkers are coming off? Is the fact that China and Japan and South Korea and the European Union and maybe now Joe Biden are going to be sort of accelerating their moves towards net zero emissions? Do you see any signs that that's sort of changing the thinking in Canberra and other places?
Look, there's been a really profound change, I think, Giles, over the last year or two. We've started seeing very significant initiatives in terms of climate change at the local council level through the city's power partnership and some other partnerships. I don't think there's a state government in Australia that's anti clean energy and the energy transition. No matter whether they're Liberal or Labor, there's a kind of a unified view there. And South Australia, which is the most advanced state, has a Liberal government now prosecuting very aggressive clean energy policies, same as Tasmania. The last holdouts are probably 25 people in the federal parliament or thereabouts, who Malcolm Turnbull, our ex-Prime Minister, described as acting like terrorists. If they don't get their way, they threaten to blow the place up. It's no longer about economics. It's no longer about environment. It's no longer a common sense issue. It's pure ideology. And we need to get those people out. And, Zali Steggall, who you mentioned, was a really great victory. She managed to unseat Tony Abbott and win the seat of Warringah, which had been in Liberal hands forever. So that was a bit of a shock through the system. When I think about it, if we had two other Zalis who'd won, we'd have a minority government in Canberra today that would be listening to common sense. But we're not quite there. So I think that the old voices are retiring. Barnaby Joyce is out of the cabinet. So is Matt Canavan. When was the last time you heard anything from Craig Kelly? At least he's kind of on the outer. They're slowly deteriorating, but we've got to give them a bit of a push. That's my personal view anyway.
I hate to tell you this, but Canavan and Barnaby Joyce have been on a caravan for coal in the Hunter Valley for the last 2 days and all over Facebook and stuff like that. So it's all a bit depressing. But
well, that's true, but better than having them in the cabinet, eh?
That's true. Kathryn, in New Zealand, Tim just mentioned the idea of minority governments. It's actually worked really well for Australia nearly a decade ago. That's when we got the Carbon Price, Clean Energy Finance Corporation, the ARENA, the Climate Council, Tim, the Climate Change Authority. Jacinda Ardern's won a thumping victory in New Zealand, but she's chosen to keep the Greens in key positions, and one of those is the climate and environment portfolio. Do you think that's going to... What's going on there? Is she just sort of covering her bases, or is this about like a concerted effort to move forward now that the...
Oh no, I think she wants to move forward. She was being restrained by her coalition, her other coalition partner in the previous 3 years. Certainly the Greens, James Shaw is an absolute advocate for green energy, electric cars. He drives an electric car. I buttonholed him only a year or so ago about, well, you know, how come the government hasn't got any real sort of inroads into electric cars? And we suffer, unfortunately, for being a very tiny country at the back, you know, the arse end of nowhere. And, you know, we want to order cars in 20s and 50s. And other jurisdictions want to order cars in 1,000, 2,000, perhaps 10,000. You know, just give me all of the same ones in the same color, it'll be fine. Well, you know, we can't do that, and I think we suffer then. Therefore, as a result, we just don't get the kind of quantities of cars. You know, I drove an electric Mini about 2 months ago, and they'd been allocated 60 in the middle of last year. So those had been snapped up probably within about, 60 minutes of them saying, hey, we've got some electric Minis. The next ones, even if you went into Mini tomorrow with a truckload of money, they would still say about August of next year, would that be fine? You know, and will you just take any color that comes up? You know, I mean, it's mindless. So, you know, you really cannot, you know, we suffer from that, which is presumably why we buy a lot of secondhand cars, because getting new cars down here is like pulling teeth. But I think Jacinda wants to do it if we can keep that throughput of supply to actually, match the demand.
In Australia, we face a similar problem. We just don't seem to have enough models, enough choice, enough volume coming into the market. How do we break that?
Yeah, I think it's pretty simple there. And similarly, where in the past, Kathryn mentioned that New Zealand doesn't have a fuel efficiency standard either. I think to their credit, for a long time, they were hoping to harmonise with Australia, recognising there's a larger market just next to them, and that would make a lot of sense. Unfortunately, Australia kept letting them down by not taking the actions they should have. And now they've sort of gotten sick of it and decided it's time for them to bat out on their own. Some of those points around being a smaller market are actually quite helpful, because when it comes to can a car company serve your entire market? Well, it's not too much more production for them. They can flood your market if they wanted to. Today, the massive problem for us is, the production numbers being created for electric vehicles are obviously quite so constrained by how many batteries car companies can get access to, but also trying to make predictions around demand. And those predictions are pretty simple to make in most of the world because there are targets in place. Car companies know this country is going to need X amount of vehicles. That's what the government has told us they are going to need. And then there's usually a little bit left over, and there's a decision about where do you put those leftover ones. And you can appreciate if you're sitting around the table of a global company and you've got country after country, not only, and there's a really important point, not only providing significant support for electric vehicle uptake, we're talking about billions of dollars of investment in things like charging infrastructure, in most countries getting around the equivalent of Australian $10,000 to $15,000 in incentives. And then on the other hand, you see a country that's doing nothing. And now, in fact, seeing a country that's going in the other direction, providing a disincentive for uptake, you go, well, hang on, why wouldn't I send it somewhere else? You know, if I've only got so many to go around right now, why would I go to this country first? What we'd started to see is a bit of shift from that, of particularly a few companies saying, well, we want to start taking a leading role. We want to start building the market in Australia. But that discussion, as I say, it's a hard discussion to have when you look at a lot of positives on one end and then neutral on the other end. It's a very, very different discussion to have when you got positives on one end and negative on the other end.
Yeah. Rob, tell us, this target that's being set by Boris, bless his heart, soul, 2030, no new car sale, no new petrol and diesel sales. It's quite ambitious, isn't it? Because it's going to be, how are they going to achieve that? Are the public going to go there willingly, and will the car makers deliver?
I think you've hit the floppy-headed nail on the head there. How do we achieve it? If there's one person that hasn't got a clue and hasn't thought about it for more than a thousandth of a second, it is our current Prime Minister. That said, I think the automotive industry, their ears pricked up and they went, oh, all right, we'll start making electric cars. You know? I think there has been enormous friction within the automotive industry about actually producing the cars, about showing how about very careful manipulation of how the figures are. Do people really want them? All that I do feel now that is in the past. So, I mean, I've just test driven the Fiat 500e. For years, Fiat had to make electric cars for the Californian market. Otherwise, they couldn't sell Chryslers in California. So you'd go to California, you'd see loads of little Fiat 500es, and they're brilliant little cars. And they would not make them. And the bosses of Fiat said, electric cars are ridiculous, they don't work. And now they're mass producing electric Fiat 500es because people want them and because there's demand for them. And you can actually, in Italy, you can go into a Fiat showroom and buy an electric one. And they're really cool little cars. I think we are seeing this real explosion of new models and new companies coming into the market. I think the disruption is going to come from China. You know, we're just about to start reviewing the Xiaopeng, which is coming into Europe, the first Xiaopeng, which, you know, they didn't exist 10 years ago. And they are selling tens of thousands of cars every month in China. Yeah. And they look very good. And I mean, they did borrow some engineers from Tesla, possibly some ideas, you know, but they've actually made really good cars, you know.
Yeah. I'm starting to see some questions finally that have come through from the audience, and that's not because they weren't asking them, it's because I couldn't see them. One for you straight up, Rob, is about the right-hand market, because right-hand drive market, because the UK and like Australia and New Zealand, they're all right-hand drive. The only other major one, if I can remember rightly, is Japan. Are there going to be enough? Are there going to be enough electrics on the road?
I mean, I think it's so difficult to tell, but at the moment we're experiencing like that. Like for instance, the Fiat 500e I drove left-hand drive. I drove it in this country, but it's left-hand drive, and the right-hand drive one arrives in February or March next year. So we're lagging by about 4 months in this country. When you see a car come out and we'll test drive it, and it's always left-hand drive, and about 3 or 4 months later, the right-hand drive ones start to appear. So it doesn't seem to be an issue. And a couple of engineers have told me it's a lot easier making a right-hand drive electric vehicle than a right-hand drive combustion vehicle. The control systems are easier to transfer that way. It's basically wire that you're moving, not mechanical controls. I have no idea, because I think most modern cars are controlled by wire anyway, regardless of powertrain. But that hasn't been an issue that I've heard discussed. And I mean, certainly there's always a waiting list, but it's much less. So the introduction of the VW ID3, a neighbour of mine decided to get a VW ID3 last month, and it arrived this week. Brand new VW. And I mean, they are, you know, it's very hard not to wax lyrical about the ID3, but it is, you know, that's a mass market car. And what is difficult to imagine is if there was demand in Australia and New Zealand for Volkswagen ID3s, I can't imagine the guys at Zwickau, the manufacturing plant where they make them in Germany, going, no, we won't put any on a boat and sail them to Australia. We don't want to sell them there. You think, okay, let's fill a boat. We'll just fill one. We'll put 3/4 of them in Australia and 1/4 in New Zealand, and people can buy, you know. I think if there's the demand there, it's kind of the way I understand capitalism working. You know, if there's a lot of people want to buy oranges, there's going to be someone pushing a cartload of oranges to that market. You know, that seems to be the way that works.
Yeah, Chris, I'm going to throw this one at you, and it might be a tricky one for you. Someone's asking what sort of policy and economic levers are, you know, to non-responsive governments, and the suggestion is, do we have to use extinction rebellion tactics like mass EV blockages of highways to protest and disrupt? Or might we be better served by identifying the 25 that Tim talked about and just put them all in electric vehicles and say...
Yeah, I think there's some great ideas. Look, I would suspect that there will be some show of EV support coming up in a number of different ways over probably the next 6 to 12 months before the attempt to get these EV taxes in. And that could have anything as visual as, let's say 100 EVs out the front of particular parliaments in different states, or even federally, sitting out the front. I know I've heard those sort of things discussed, and I think that sort of show of support visually helps. It helps get media attention. It makes a nice photo that people can use over and over and over. So yeah, I think there's that sort of stuff. But on top of that, I think we need to work our way through some of the usual channels in government as well. But that's all going to be about support, and people who are out there listening will need to put their hat in the ring, and they will need to sign petitions, and they're going to need to be involved, and they're going to need to write to their local member, and they're going to need to be involved in this sort of movement, and we need to get numbers to the ball. That it's as simple as that, because we have to show clearly that this is something that's happening. And the amazing thing, Robert's talking about what's going on in the UK, so the largest right-hand drive market in the world. In Australia, we don't have a choice. This is happening anyway, whether we want it to happen or not. We did a great job of getting rid of our car manufacturers. We're not making any of these cars. When VW says, guess what, we're taking our whole range electric, if another VW is ever going to be driven in Australia, it's going to need to be electric. So this is not a choice that we get to make. We just need to get on with it. And we're missing such an opportunity with all the entrepreneurs and all of the really smart people who can be doing stuff here. And, a lot of Beyhad's members who are actually being hampered by the current approach, because Australia is similar to solar. We could lead the world. Usually what would happen, we'd come up with a great idea, then sell it overseas and someone would get rich off it. But we could still come up with the ideas.
Okay, guys, we've only got about 4 minutes left, so I'm going to throw to each of you a simple question. You've got about 30 seconds each to reply. If you had one thing to do, what would you do, Tim?
I'd get active against those 25 blockages. We know how to do that. Just tell them their time's up and support another candidate.
Fair enough. Beyhad?
Get active within your community. When we talk about shifting governments, it sounds so big and hard, but really you're a voter, you've got a local MP. If the more they're hearing about it from their own area, the more they're going back to their parties and going, everybody keeps hassling about this, we've got to do a bit better.
Kathryn?
Just push for emission standards, because that's the stick and carrot, which is the only way that hopefully you could move the discussion further towards we cannot increase carbon dioxide within the atmosphere. Otherwise, it won't matter what you're driving, because actually you won't be driving it for very long.
Chris, I know you're going to make a big announcement just after this program, but after this thing, just immediately afterwards. But just briefly, what would you do as your one single action?
Oh, look, I would ask people to join the association, because the more members that we've got, the more pull that we have within this debate. If we were like the Norwegian EV Association, who've got 70,000 members, they get a big say in what goes on. So if we can build that momentum, we will also get a big say in what goes on.
And Robert, over to you. And your final suggestion: it must not involve Boris Johnson, bicycles, or jetpacks.
I mentioned. I would try and do a popular publicity campaign linking the popularity of solar with cars. So I just want to see a picture of a bloke filling up his diesel pickup, and a guy standing next to him. Mate, you still buy fuel? I make my own. Yeah. Sorry, I apologise for the accent.
It's not fair. And guess what? Go ahead.
Sorry, it's only that, that's even I, in this country, in lousy solar UK, fill my Nissan Leaf with solar power all summer. And I pay nothing to drive that car, probably 4,000 or 5,000 miles a year. Don't use it that much, but it's amazing. And I pay nothing.
Yeah.
It's free.
Terrific. And in Australia, guess what? We actually have solar. And
you have a lot of solar. I'm very jealous. Yeah.
Tim, I've got another minute. I'm going to throw back to you. We've talked about Australia's success in COVID and its failure in other things. I guess you could talk about success in renewables at state level. Can we walk and talk at the same time? Or
Yeah, well, that's boy, it's perplexing because we are moving. Everything is in favour of moving in the right direction. We understand how important EVs are in the transition. It's a no-brainer. Same with wind and solar, and yet we have some pushback from a few people. You mentioned a few of them earlier, not getting there, and I really don't think that position's sustainable. I think that the latest figures are that something like 80% of Australians are deeply concerned about climate change, and a high percentage of those want action. So, eventually we will have to see change at the federal level. Tragically, what we really need, though, is a recognition of this as an emergency, just as we did with COVID. I don't think we'll get that from a Conservative government, sadly. I'd love to be proved wrong, but I don't think so. I think we'll need a revolution there, some sort of big change.
Well, we might get it from a state Conservative government, as you pointed out, with some of
the absolutely true. They've been stellar. Some of them have been fantastic.
Yeah. Look, I'm going to hand back to John. I'd just like to say thank you very much for the invitation to have me hosting this webinar. Thank you very much to all the guests. It's been fantastic. I'm very patient and it's just been very dynamic. Hi to Rob, Chris, Beyhad, Tim, Kathryn. I'm going to hand you back to John.
Thanks, Giles. Great job, mate. Ladies and gentlemen, I can't hear your applause loud enough, but these are the brightest minds. Robert Llewellyn from Fully Charged, Kathryn Trounson from the Better New Zealand Trust, Beyhad Jafari from the Electric Vehicle Council, Chris Nash from the AEVA, Professor Tim Flannery, and our fantastic interviewer. You can see the banner in the background. It's the best social media feed I ever get from the Driven and Renewed Energy. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. And to make this vision real, it's not over. There's a couple of minutes left. Every single person tuned in can now stay tuned and you can make a positive difference. By all means, stay online, you guys, as Chris Nash presents the 2030 vision on behalf of the Australian Electric Vehicle Association and unfortunately on behalf of Australia. Please, Chris, tell us what's up.
Thanks, John, and thanks everyone who participated in today. It's been absolutely fantastic, wonderful, informative discussion. But where to from here? What do we do here in Australia? Well, we've heard how several other like-minded countries such as Norway, Canada, Scotland, New Zealand are handling the transition to electric drive. In fact, Norway have committed to a ban on fossil fuel vehicles by 2025, whilst other European nations such as Ireland, Denmark, Germany, the Netherlands, Sweden and the UK have all committed to 2030. The UK being a crucial one for Australia as it's the largest right-hand drive market in the world and is one of our largest trading partners. And as we just heard, this year alone has gone through 68,000 EV sales in the middle of a pandemic, which is a great effort. As a consequence, registration of electrified vehicles in September in Europe has taken over those of diesel. Other countries around the world offer incentives via tax discounts, grants and bonuses. But here in Australia, we have nothing from our federal government. And now the EV taxes have crept into the state budgets. The transport emissions are our second largest contributor to greenhouse gases and have increased 64% since 1990. And during the pandemic, we're all given a window into a possible EV future, with lockdowns resulting in 60% reduction of air pollution of inner cities across the globe. At the Australian Electric Vehicle Association, we believe the time is now to take action. We can no longer wait for the powers that be to address this situation. So it's with great pride that I announce our 2030 vision. The AEVA has voted to make our own pledge to removing all internal combustion engine vehicles under our control by 2030. And you too can join the movement. We have set up a 2030 vision page on our website that individuals, businesses, schools and clubs can join to make the pledge. As we're not getting any leadership from the federal government on this absolutely vital issue, it's up to us as individuals to make it happen. As JFK once famously said, a rising tide raises all ships. And with this pledge, we want those ships to be electric by 2030. So head to www.aeva.asn.au and join us and make your pledge to a better Australia. Thank you. Now, John, I'd just like to make a few thank yous for today, if that's okay. I know you wanted to mention a few, but I just wanted a quick shout out to a few of the people who made today possible. It's been obviously the largest EV conference that we've ever seen in this country and potentially in our whole region. So I wanted to thank Lillian and Steve from the Victorian State Government, Tim Washington at Jet Charge, Jeff Brady at EV Networks, Kathleen at FIMA, and John Cavalieros at Transport Mutual, Jane Butler and Christian Hamburg at AGL, Wolfgang at EMOS, Russell and Emma at Evolution, and Dave and Peter at EV Automotive. But of course, today doesn't happen as many people would be aware. We are a volunteer organisation. And so I wanted to thank a few of our volunteers. And so, John, a big thank you to you as the MC for Stream 1. A thank you to Natalie Bucknell for her work on Stream 2, Christian Hamburg on Stream 3, and your fantastic support. Many people wouldn't be aware that you've got a support sitting behind the camera. Clive Atwater, Christopher Walkden, and Doug Rolfe. Thank you very much. And then my team back at the AEVA Vic branch, we had a subcommittee which was led by Bryce Gatton, and then ably helped out by numerous people, but special mention to Brendan Davies and Kathleen Davies. They've done an absolutely fantastic job. We've turned this conference from what was going to be 10,000 people a day out at the showgrounds to an online conference, given the movement of the pandemic, and absolutely delighted with how it's turned out today. And then lastly, but not least, the IT working group who work away in the background, getting everything happening. So special mention there to Christopher Walkden again and Dr. Chris Jones, who helped me especially get our 2030 vision page up on the website, which people can go to straight away, sign up and get themselves part of the movement for a 2030 vision and hopefully a much cleaner and better Australia.
Great job, Chris. Yep, we are the change we need to be. Nice quoting JFK. It's my pleasure, and of course, if the professor and Robert downs off, and I saw Kathryn. Did you see Kathryn doing the New Zealand EV Taka a second ago? Charge your car. I saw her. We need one in Australia too, but of course, there's nothing worse than coming second in New Zealand. Let's be frank, that's the real motivation. I have a big announcement for next year. The live event, and it'll be the biggest one ever held in the Southern Hemisphere, will be hosted by the South Australian and Northern Territory branch of the AEVA, and it will be held as a conference for government, industry and EV leaders at the Adelaide Oval. To coincide with the World Solar Challenge finishing in the city centre, we'll have the biggest ever display of electric vehicles of all kinds ever seen in Australia all weekend at the Adelaide Showgrounds. Bikes, cars, solar cars, vans, autonomous vehicles, an electric plane, along with related charging equipment and renewable energy products. And of course, our try and drive. If you've never done that, get the EV grin. We even have a special project to restore an historic Adelaide designed and built electric car from the 70s. Do Google Investigator 1. Details early next year, but we can't wait to see you there. Whack it in your diary, Thursday the 28th to Sunday the 31st of October. I'll say it again because Giles is writing it down for a story. The AEVA EV Expo, Thursday the 28th to Sunday the 31st of October 2021. Now, ladies and gentlemen, none of us know what social distancing will look like then, and we now know that sanitizing and social distancing saves lives. But I can guarantee you, ladies and gentlemen, in a vineyard, social distancing is much easier, and red wine is the ultimate sanitizer. Once again, thank you to you who will make this difference. And I ask you, ladies and gentlemen, as we close for the day, 2 minutes and 27 seconds early, what's your vision? What's your vision? It's not just seeing it. It only occurs by action. Share your vision. Take it to the council. Take this video to the school. Show this to the kids. Go and see those 21 barbarians and really shirt front them. Kathryn used the word, she buttonholed them. Mr. Abbott said shirt fronting is fine as long as they don't push back. We have to get it across with tact and diplomacy. This is our future. I have 8 grandchildren. I will not stop until this happens, and neither will any of you, I'm sure of that. And I'm lifted strongly on the wings of Beyhad and Tim and all of you as the global leaders of your industry. Share this vision with your schools. Maybe the children might need to ensure their own future, and I won't say how dare they have to. Share your vision and some agitation with your local member. Join a group, a party maybe even. Yelling on Facey convinces nobody. Again, our sponsors, our organisers, and you, the paying public, you're the ones. You're the disruptor. You're the future. Your vision is the one, the unstoppable force meeting the immovable object. Remember, if you want change, if it's to be, it's up to me. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. Be the disruptor, be the solution, and we'll see you next year. Thank you for your attendance.